Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Where's the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. I am here joined by my wonderful co-host, Jane. Hi, Jane. How are you?
Hello. I'm good. I had a good weekend. We went boating. I went to the beach, enjoying the last couple of days of summer. I got absolutely burned to crisp this weekend, so that was my fault. But yeah, it was a great weekend. How are you doing, Sabrina?
Yep, pretty good. Same here. Enjoying the summer, going on one more boat, and yeah, just soaking up the last rays of sunshine. That sounds extreme. But I could not be more excited. We have an extremely special guest on today, and we're going to be talking about a topic that can be very relevant to a lot of different people, but I'm personally very excited to talk about this. So, where is the line between being an employee versus an entrepreneur on a path to financial independence? And we
Yes.
have LaSean Smith with us. And I would love for LaSean, obviously we have heard, we've received your background, we've stalked your LinkedIn profile, and we were so honored that you were reached out to us about where's the line. So would love for you to share a little bit more about your personal journey from we learned you were an avionics technician in the Navy to also being a tech executive to now being an entrepreneur. So, sort of walk us through what made you go through that transition and what motivated you making those different choices.
Yeah. First off, thanks for hanging out. Second, I'm here in Seattle. The sun is long gone for the summer, and so no fun there. But to your question, the reason I like having these conversations is I mentor and coach quite a number of folks, and I don't do that as a business. I just kind of carve off a block of my time every week to chat with folks that I run across. And many times I see a pattern in the conversations. And a lot of it anchors around decision making. People are at a fork in the road at a certain stage in life, and they're like, which way should I go? And I really love taking some of those conversations I have in one-to-one kind of scenarios, and then, meeting with folks like you all and, connecting with your audience. So folks can start to hear like, oh, LaSean did this dumb thing when he was in his 20s, and I probably shouldn't do that. And that's where I get a lot of energy. And, kind of selfishly, what I get out of this, occasionally I run across someone who I might hire for a job or someone that I might invest in. And these are very long, type relationships. I might meet someone today and, not do a deal with them for 4 or 5 years. And so for me, it's all about the long game. And I just love having conversations about, decision making in our life.
Well, thank you for being here today. We are really excited to just hear your perspective when it comes to achieving financial independence. Like Sabrina shared, you've had a variety of different background, right? You've had experience working for others, and now you have experience investing in others and working for yourself. Before we even get into some of those questions, can you help us think about how you define financial independence? Because as we were planning this episode, we realized different people's definition of financial independence looks very, very different. And so what you're working towards is different. So help us understand what your perspective is and how you look at financial independence.
Yeah, I love the concept of a North Star, some type of destination that you're moving towards. And in life, I feel like we can have multiple destinations. You don't have to set it once and then you're never allowed to change. You can kind of have these places where it's like, I want to get to this destination. You build a map, you work back. And then once you get there, you might want to go somewhere else. And so I think that's very important to give ourselves permission to kind of have more than one kind of big dream. But for financial independence specifically, I have a very simple definition. Financial independence, is the time freedom that we get without any anxiety from some type of passive income source, right? And so I'll just kind of break that again. I want freedom over my time, right? I want to be able to spend it however I want up till the last minute. And I don't want any anxiety around that, right? So I could be a starving artist and just say I'm not working and I have freedom of my calendar. But now I have maybe anxiety on how am I going to pay my bills. I could say I'm going to give up all freedom of my time. And as a result, I am going to maybe feel more stable with my finances. But on the flip side, now, like, I'm not really free, right? And there's extremes, there's a spectrum to all of this. And when I use the word passive income, there's all sorts of ways people can make money on the side. I don't knock most of those. Some of those things I think people should stay away from. I don't think most people should be day trading. I don't think most people should have a drop ship business for Amazon. Like there's a few businesses that you probably shouldn't go chase, but regardless of how you might make money in addition to your kind of main job, if you're working and you're doing any type of work and they don't just automatically send you a check every month, every quarter, it's not a passive income stream. And so for most people, that's going to be, an ETF, a bond, like truly managed real estate, not, hey, I own 3 properties and I kind of work on my property management firm, but, they sometimes they need me and I have to go hop in. All of those can be great ways to build wealth, but ultimately you want something that pays you when you never show up. And for many people, it's almost like anxiety inducing thinking about that, because it's like, oh crap, how long would it take me to get to that point? And there are all sorts of paths I think folks can take, but to me, that's the kind of the gold standard definition. And then back to our earlier point, you really have to figure out what is your destination, and you shouldn't compare yourself to someone else. You should, be in competition with yourself. And I think that's the only place. And so if person A is like, if I can clear out all my debt, have a stable place to live, and I'm not stressed out, I got plenty of savings, and I'm going to work in this career for the next 20, 30 years, that's an amazing path. For someone else who says, I want to have kind of this ultimate, kind of FI, and in my 40s or 50s, I want to be able to spend my minutes in each day however I like. That's another path. And so I try not to judge what your path is. I try to think, in a very systems oriented way on kind of how you want to get there. And that's at the core of my background. I started as a process engineer. I moved into web development. Then I moved into UX design. Then after going to graduate school, I worked as a product manager. And really, each of those are just different points in, how you make things. In my context is in the software industry, but you could apply many of those same types of skill sets to making furniture or working in logistics. And so the industry isn't so important. I think for most folks, it's about skill stacking, and you can still, kind of skill stack your way to FI many times by just kind of learning more things, creating more leverage, making yourself more valuable. And your network will expand naturally as your skills increase, because more people will find value in what you do. And so regardless of how you tackle that, I think most things kind of accrue to you either make something or you sell something. And many of the other things we tend to do in professional life, those are adjacent, but they're not the core. You got to make or sell. And so for me, I think most folks will find success, kind of following one of those paths. And when you achieve FI, I think the fear that I hear when I talk to people, they're just like, I just got to go solve these money problems. And I was like, yes, money will solve your money problems, but you might still have relationship problems or health problems or other types of things. And so it's also important to remind ourselves that FI and kind of your financial wellness broadly is just part of the stool of having a great life.
It's super interesting because, to go back to your point about there's different paths and people have different definitions of FI, I'm curious from your perspective, have you noticed, and you've worked with obviously people of all background, all age groups, and different, maybe even generational differences. Do you think there are differences from generation to generation as they define what financial independence mean to them? So some of the things that I'm thinking about is, have we seen, say, older generations prefer things like, financial independence means having a home, paying off your mortgage, and maybe, to your point, having a 401k or having some sort of investment that just kind of grows on its own and pays you as you retire. Maybe for younger generations, what they think financial independence is the ability to, I don't know, travel or be a nomad, right? Like the definition kind of changes and the goal looks different. Do you feel like your definition still applies to all those, or does it really vary?
Yeah, so I would say that, why do we need money? Like, we need money as a proxy to buy other things, right? Like, money doesn't really have a ton of value within itself. And if you really anchor on what can we normalize across all of ourselves? It's time. And that's why I anchor on time. And so if you look at, not rich people, but truly wealthy people, what are they usually chasing? Like after they get the trappings and maybe they get some material things, but like what is the most valuable asset that they trade in? And it's their time. And so if someone says, hey, can you show up to this recurring meeting on, every Wednesday at 9 a.m.? As, kind of an employee mindset, it's just like, that's just part of the job. But as someone who is truly wealthy and has reached FI, they probably don't have any recurring meetings, or if they do, they're far few between and they're very high value. And so what do you get to use that time with? Well, one person may decide to travel. One person may decide to learn a hobby. One person may decide to, do volunteerism and charity. So I think how you exercise and spend your time budget may definitely vary across individuals and even demographics. But I think the rule holds up. The challenge across those generations that I see is, sometimes we like to externalize like, oh, well, this group had it easier than this group, and not acknowledge the liability that we're bringing to the table. And so, and I'll generalize. And so if folks, throw stones at their device while I make these generalizations, I understand. But if I think about, let's say, boomers or Gen X as a crowd, I do believe that those generations had an easier starting point to tap into leverage. And so, potentially, buying a home or getting access to things where they're much more affordable and they started compounding, they definitely, got the benefit. But to their credit, I think many more of those folks are much more resilient, right? So when they're under duress and stress, they kind of just figure it out. And maybe that's not a healthy way to live, but they learn to live working through very stressful environments, and that allows them to persevere. If I look at Gen Z, I think many folks in the Gen Z group have a much more balanced look at life, right? But at kind of their liability that they have to acknowledge or at least tackle is many are less comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And so if you're easily triggered or a lot of things create anxiety, it's really hard to kind of move through life because you can feel like you're paralyzed sometimes. And so, and then millennials, I think, are kind of a mix between, both of those, right? But I say that to say that all of us, regardless of demographic, I think have some type of asset or positive attribute, maybe some privilege that we've been given. But at the same time, we probably also have something we need to tackle. And so if we can kind of acknowledge both of those, whatever lane you're in, I think that the path to that FI realization is possible.
I really appreciate you breaking down, the different generations. And as a millennial myself, I definitely feel being torn between both sides. Sometimes I feel like from my parents as boomers and really trying to have that path to financial independence, which was very much like money driven, right? Like you have to have a lot of savings and don't spend too much. From a Gen Z perspective, more caring about flexibility and just living my life freely and not really being tied down. So thank you. So going on, I know you mentioned a few things in terms of advantages to being an entrepreneur. And I love this concept of time and anchoring on time. But can you elaborate a little bit more as someone that is in that has that question mark, right? Like between traditional career versus actually taking that step to becoming an entrepreneur. What are some of the key advantages and disadvantages that you would call out as someone would make that decision?
Yeah, to start, I would anchor on some framework, and that's the way my brain works. Like to figure out what's good or bad, you need to figure out, well, for what baseline. I am not always successful, but I attempt to practice stoicism and really have like a clear mind and say, look, I'm not in control. Let me not stress over things that don't matter. You're trying to really figure out kind of your place. And so the reason I start there is some other folks may say, if you've heard the Naval Ravikant kind of phrase around kind of chasing status as a zero-sum game, that's just a game I don't play. But if you are chasing status, I I would answer these questions a little differently. So I think it's an important thing to start with, to say like, well, what game are you playing in the first place? But back to the core question, some of the things that I believe is a positive around entrepreneurship is you can learn really fast. And the reason being is like you have to survive. Another thing is you don't need permission to get a shot, especially if you go into a new industry that doesn't have a lot of incumbents and competition. You will become the leader just by your by your ability to show up. Another piece is, while we all need social proof, you don't need social proof that's gated by anyone. So when I say social proof, I'm saying you can go get a credential from some college or university. You can get a recommendation letter from someone you work with or a former manager. You can show the results of your work. You can get testimonials from customers. Like, regardless, you need social proof for someone to believe that your skills are what they say. And, an entrepreneur doesn't need a credential. They just need to show that they can sell this or solve this problem. And then, last is, I think, an interesting one where there's a perceived sense of stability for people who work, secure jobs or stable jobs. And I don't think that goes in any bucket. I think the perception of stability is all fake. And if you are running an entrepreneurship, journey, or running your business, like a hobby, it will be unstable. But if you put in the same level of effort that you do when you're working for someone, you're making wise decisions, you're thinking ahead. I think most of that stability is not higher or lower, regardless of the path. And then if you flip that and say, okay, well, if those are some of the benefits for the entrepreneur, what's, some of the benefits for the employee? I think one of the biggest ones is that you get to learn from someone else and someone else's system, right? Mm-hmm. So you get to show up at a place and it's like, all right, this is how it works. And even if you show up at a place that's dysfunctional, sometimes that can still be beneficial. But, the idea of, people hiring coaches and things like that, I find it really interesting that there's this wave of people who pay somebody $5,000 or $10,000 to be their coach, because a $20 book, you buy a great book. And these are like books that have stood the test of time, like books from the 1950s and 1960s, not a book that came out 6 months ago. But, right. A $20 book and 8 hours of reading that is probably going to give you more value than most $5,000 coaches, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just because there's 20 years of experience like distilled down into this artifact. And similarly, when you show up as an employee, there's, years, sometimes decades of process, tribal knowledge, all these things that are baked into this organization. And it's like going to school. And so for me, that's one of the biggest reasons that I think you can get, some great benefits as an employee. Another one is, you can meet people that may become lifelong friends, people that become, you get to not just like casually meet someone networking, you like show up with them every week and you're like, I trust this person, I can depend on this person, we share values. All these mm-hmm. things become really, I think, impactful. And wherever you go, they kind of stay with you. It's almost like a sorority or fraternity, if you will. I have people from various places I've worked, and there's like a little club in each of those groups, which I really mm-hmm. find powerful. And you can still, as an entrepreneur, obviously, not be lonely. I hear this sometimes where it's like, it's so lonely. That's like, you're doing that to yourself. You just have to like decouple your work friends from the expectation that you're going to get it from your job. You have to go get it somewhere else. But the benefit as an employee is many times if you're working on a great team at a great place, you're going to get that kind of built into the process. And then lastly, for folks who are still learning how to manage their money, how to just practically build a healthy relationship with dollars, with their cash. If you work as an employee, there's some really basic rules that you can follow and not break into jail, not get into trouble. And so for folks who are still navigating things, it's kind of a safety net to get started. But, like with most things, if you put, I like to say, if you put 40 hours, which, that's greater than zero, but that's not a lot of time. If you put 40 hours into really learning how financial wellness and personal finance works. You probably won't need to hire a financial advisor. You will make very high confidence decisions, and you'll realize that it's mostly about mindset and behavior. Quick sidebar, there's a book called The Psychology of Money. And the punchline of the book is, regardless if you come from a disadvantaged place or point of privilege, if you have a lot of money or no money, what mostly decides or determines if you're going to be successful in the future is your behavior. Because the person who thinks they know it all can still be greedy, can still make poor decisions. The person who comes from a point of scarcity may never actually play the game all the way and never really have a shot. And so it's less about where we start and what we know and more about how we behave. And so regardless of those paths, I think the punchline is try to figure out how can you behave the best way you can for who you are.
I think one is honestly building lifelong friends. I mean, honestly, just even reflecting on my own experience, Sabrina and I met through work. We would have never maybe met at all if it wasn't for our jobs at the time. And even though now Sabrina no longer works for that company, we stayed friends. And through that experience, we were able to identify the fact that we have this hobby and this interest outside of work and build this lifelong relationship outside of work. So 100% to your point, I have personally benefited from that. The other thing that really resonated with me is the perception of stability. I think I honestly make this mistake myself, right? I work for a corporate company and I work my regular 9 to 5, and it gives me this perception of oh, I have a stable job. I think what has changed my mind as of recent years is all the layoffs that we saw, whether that is the pandemic or even the recent tech, the struggle that tech companies are going through. A lot of people, as much as you are a part of the family and, you have the stable job, you could be gone tomorrow. So
right.
I think it was a rude awakening for a lot of people who are working in more traditional 9 to 5 corporate America, realizing that ultimately this is a company, right? They need to take care of themselves. And so you could be gone tomorrow, no matter how much you feel like there is that perception of stability. So that is just fascinating. I'm kind of curious. You mentioned in the very beginning of your answer, what game are you playing? I'm curious for our audience here. What are some things that they can be thinking about as they're making that decision, right? You mentioned, am I trying to climb the ladder? Am I working for a particular title? What are some parameters that people should be considering as they're making that decision of, do I stay in my regular 9 to 5 or work for somebody else versus taking a risk and becoming an entrepreneur?
So life stage matters in this question and where you want to go. Right. So for many people I talk to, they are trying to figure this out after they've committed to certain things. Right. So if someone is, 21 and no real responsibilities, or they're 48 and no real responsibilities, the answers are really easy. Right. Because even if you're in a relationship, as long as you share values, it's pretty easy. But as soon as you have to take care of other humans, or even, I'm not equating kids with pets, but even if you have pets, it really can put a constraint on your mobility. And so when I hear people who say, all right, LaSean, what should I do? One of the first things I want to know is, do you have kids? Do you want kids? Do you have a pet? Do you have any caregiving responsibilities that you're committed to? Because if any of those are in play, by decision, you might get, the trade-off might be totally worth it, but you have to be pragmatic that you're not going to be able to, go off and ignore everybody for weeks on end, acquiring a skill, or, kind of work, all hours of the night when you get off your day job and not interact with any humans for 12 months while you're trying to, build something new. And so pragmatically, those things are not, you have to factor those into kind of your evaluation process. But that being said, I feel the bigger question folks should be asking is, if I if I really want X, right? Like, and again, let's say you want, I'll give you a real more tactical example. There's something called the 3-house rule. And the 3-house rule is a good rule of thumb for most people who are trying to figure out how much should I save? What should I have, right? And you figure out where you're living or where you want to live. And then you say, all right, what would it cost to buy this house? And then you multiply it by 3. And so if you live in a place where you can buy a house for $200,000, your number is $600K. If you want to live in $1.5 million house, your number is $4.5 million. And it's crazy how resilient this times 3 number is, even across other countries. Now, there are pockets of anomalies in most places, but as a rule of thumb, if you pull that off, you'll know what your number is. And the goal isn't like, well, I should become a real estate investor and I should go buy 2 houses. The point is, if you take that number, let's say somebody wants to buy a house for $500,000 and their number is 1.5. What that means is you should be able to have $1 million in other assets, and you're living in one of the houses. And so 1/3 is you're living in, 1/3 is covering all the expenses, and then the other third is you just living. Maybe that's taking trips or what have you. But the biggest unlock for me is, can you go wherever you want to go whenever you want to go? And it's not about, I want to get a yacht or I want to get a private plane. It's, for instance, I have an opportunity that popped up, and I have to travel to Southeast Asia next month. And if I had a job, I would have to just like, all right, do I have the vacation time? Can I like get somebody to cover my project? All these things. And what's amazing, this is why I say there's kind of a false perception of job stability. If you quit your job and you start a business and you live your life the same way you were as an employee, then you're squandering the options. But if you quit your job and you're like, now the whole world is my potential customer, like legit the whole world, there's so many things that I guarantee everybody listening that they already know that they could package up and would become extremely valuable to someone else. And so it doesn't mean it's a slam dunk or you're just going to like get out there now that all the cash is rolling in, but that ability to move wherever you want to move. And I'm sure when I get off the plane on this trip, I'm going to observe something. I'm like, oh, they do that in a different way. And, and I've been all over the world, and every time I leave learning something or observing an opportunity that had nothing to do with why I went on that trip in the first place. And so the idea of traveling, not just to go on a beach, but to just interact with the world and expand your network of friends, like it's a really, really powerful construct. And for me, that's mostly what I'm trying to exercise. I'm not trying to go hang out on a beach. I reached FI in my 30s. I'm in my 40s now. And at one point I was like, man, should I just go like buy a spot and just hang out and like not do anything? And like your brain would go stir crazy doing that, right? But at the same time, I'm not going to go take all my cash and just squander it, right? And then get myself in a risky position where now I'm forced to go, take another role. And so I find like the highest value of everything is your time and your ability to spend it however you like, whenever you like.
Oh, there's so many great takeaways. You really got me thinking. One thing I really want to do a better job at is I like this concept of not squandering and also making the most out of wherever you are. So earlier you mentioned like when you're at a company, like some of the adventures, right? So learning from other people or learning about the system. So I want to do a much better job of like actually taking advantage of that now that I am at a successful company, but just seeking out more conversations with people that I can learn from. I think I've taken this for granted. And then now what you just said in terms of you have the opportunity to travel. I had the opportunity to travel recently. I was able to go to France and just connect with people in Paris and like learn from random strangers in the bar, but always being like intentional and asking them certain questions and just making the most out of that. Like it broadens your horizon, and to your point, like not just laying on the beach, but actually seeking out conversation and having that growth mindset. So I'm just very inspired right now.
Well, and let me give you 2 quick pro tips. You all may already do this, but I'll share them. The first is when you think about showing up someplace new. I had a very wealthy friend tell me, it's like, LaSean, when you show up, you need to go to the private clubs, you need to find the lawyers, you need to figure out, the high-end real estate agents. And his point was, I just need to go hang out with them because they have the keys to the social circle for the rest of the city. And over time, I realized you don't have to be wealthy to play that playbook. All you have to do is make a list. I've actually done this in the past. Make a list of the hostels and the co-working spaces and wherever you go, and just go hang out. And there'll be some weirdos and some crazy people, but you will just meet very interesting people by the nature of you showing up, and you won't be doing a touristy activity, right? You'll meet people doing something they already want to do. And so there's already kind of this kind of inherent, idea of a shared value. And then the other thing is when you're traveling, or even when you're at home, it's really trying to figure out what are the places where I can find these serendipitous moments to really understand and, how everything is connected. So I like to think politics, arts and culture, business. And if you type in Yelp or TripAdvisor, you're going to be here's this museum you can go to, all that's cool. But I would challenge anyone in whatever city they live in to get in their car. If they don't have a car, get on the bus or public transit and find neighborhoods that you have no reason to go to. And just go to them, and guaranteed something in your brain will spark, and you're like, oh crap, I never thought about this, or I met this person. But I find many times we just kind of get in our rhythm. Is if you are in a place and you're just going to the same grocery store and you're going to the same, cafe, and you're doing all these things. And especially if you live in a large city and you don't go to some random spot, you're just never going to kind of get out of the funk, because your body's going to say this is all so repetitious, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, I have a half a dozen grocery stores in Seattle that I go to. I go to Whole Foods. I go to a Trader Joe's. I go to a local co-op. I go to 2 different Asian grocery stores where I can get a lot of unique stuff. I go to this other kind of international. I just go to all different places, and it's just an unlock, because it's oh, here's this ingredient that I hadn't thought of. And you're not just aisles of Kraft and, General Mills and nonsense. And so I think that playbook can be applied to how we move around. And even if you have a job, when you get off work, you can go somewhere and just challenge yourself to pick a different neighborhood that you haven't been before.
Yeah, I love that. Getting out of that repetition. I think that's so critical, and anyone can apply that. So even just, I want to do I think actually remembering back my time in Chicago, Jane, when I went to a grocery store, I would decide between 2 paths, and usually I would always go the same route. And then I'm okay, today I'm going to force myself to take this other route. And it's just a simple thing, but I don't know, it feels in a weird way fulfilling to just see another different route. Why always go the same? Why always do the same walk? So
yeah.
Really cool. Okay, so pivoting a little bit, obviously you work with really big brands, tech giants, including Microsoft and Amazon. So, LaSean, for someone that is in the position of potentially giving up a prestigious brand name, right? A lot of us, I think myself included, I come from a family that very much cares about the brand name, which company do you work for, and that financial stability, but I'm calling it perceived stability, right?
Sure.
As we learned from you, that these companies award you. How would you, why would someone give all of that up, that this company, the benefits that this company comes with?
Sure. So first off, I totally understand the idea that the people around us who mostly want good things for us are oh, you work at that place? That's so great. What they're really signaling is there's some pride that this person I know, this person I raised, this person I grew up with has reached some type of success, and they're economically safe, right? That's generally what people are feeling. I would say try to do the self-work to not care about what people think of you, even your closest friends and family. And it's a really challenging thing, because at the end of the day, the friction that gets created when you go down your own path, if it's, not a path that is, that what someone else is going to align with, they always come around if they love you, right? So there is no world where you go over here and oh my goodness, that's just a short heightened state. That is not the
Mhm.
sustained state for the rest of that relationship. And so, learning yourself enough to know that that is possible, I think, is just an important reminder. But then back to your question, I look at world-class organizations as schools. And so, like, where else can you get paid to learn how things work? And we use the word options a lot in life. If you look at it through the lens of financial options, options are these things that let you go buy some financial asset in the future with some deal that you negotiate ahead of time. And typically, if you don't, it's called exercise of the option. If you actually don't use the option that you bought, it's worth zero. Not like theoretically worth zero, like it's worth zero, right? So if I say, hey, I'd like to give you $100, and in return, I'd like to buy your car in the future for $10,000. And if you're like, well, my car's only worth $8,000, sure, I'll take your $100. And if you want to buy it at some point for 10 grand, like I'll do that. But maybe I know that that's like a collectible car and it's going to be soon worth 20,000. So that's why I would do this deal. And that's the basics of a financial option. I believe something very similar is happening in our careers, where many times we say, I just want to go over here and get 2 years of experience. Oh, I want to go over here and get this big name on my resume. Or, I want to go over here and learn what it's like to work in this industry. And if you never spend or exercise that option, that's worthless, right? And so that's the way I look at it. I had someone explain something to me that I've now described as kind of 3 journeys you can follow. Are you climbing the mountain? Are you protecting the mountain? Or are you searching for new mountains? And I think we need to figure out who we are professionally, right? Mm-hmm. So, and for me, I've learned that my mission is to taste the buffet. And so I got to go find new mountains. And so it makes no sense for me to go get world-class experience and education from these organizations and never exercise the option and go find the next mountain.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And even to your metaphor about like learning from these bigger companies is almost like going to school. At some point, you need to bring what you learn from that to a different place or a different
you don't stay
kind of situation. Right, exactly. And like, truthfully, Sabrina and I are in a way doing that even for our podcast, right? Like our podcast is not our full-time job, but the things that we learned through more of a traditional type of job, whether it's the communication skills, the soft skills, the program management skills, whatever it may be, all of that transfers to things outside of our work. And like, that's what essentially entrepreneurs are doing, is you're taking things that you learned through a different, maybe a more established system or process and bringing it to something that you own and that you are running. So that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned in the beginning that there's this mindset change of like this comfortableness of people saying, wow, you have this great job, and you have to be okay with shifting that mindset and being okay with people having some sort of reaction that doesn't necessarily align with how you'd like them to react. What are some other skill sets, whether it's hard skills or soft skills or mental changes that people need to make if they want to leave a corporate or a well-respected company to then do something like starting your own company?
Yeah, I'll hit a few beats. First off, I've switched industries as well, so that's also a path that can sometimes be a little scary. So you're still having a job, but you're going to another place. And every time that I've reset, the place or the industry I was leaving are like, LaSean, you're crazy. I was in the military, and then I left to go work in web application design at like little small boutiques. And I was really well known in that space because I could do design and software development. And then I just like, nah, I'm going to go work in like a startup. And they're like, you're crazy. Like, you have all these relationships. Like, why are you doing that? After the startup, I decided to go to business school. They're like, why would you leave this world? Like, all these investors want to give you money. Like, and like at every stage, there's like somebody saying like, why would you do that? They're just projecting their fears, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, I couldn't do that, or that sounds scary, or what have you. And, leadership, regardless of whether you're a people manager or you're someone who actually has a team you're managing, is kind of saying like, I'm going over here. And if you want to come hang out with me, that's cool. If not, it's okay. But having the confidence to know where you need to move is back to that self-work. And so that's, I think, the starting point of the piece. But to be more actionable on your question, I think you got to learn how to sell. And
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, selling is like a weird thing. It can be customer selling, but selling for me is just the ability to help someone else make a high confidence decision that they believe gives them perceived benefit. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're selling to customers, but you're selling to investors, you're selling to your manager, you're selling to a recruiter, you're selling to like you're always selling, right? And so the idea that you just go get to do your work and you don't become a salesperson is kind of silly. And so I don't feel that most people invest enough in their sales muscle. Another piece is writing. It's easy to chat on Slack or type short emails, but to really get business narrative writing done well is a real muscle, because like you have to cut out the adjectives and the adverbs and all the cheating. And it's like are transformative, like none of that. Like this went up by 1.8%. We thought it would go up by 3%. This delta was such and such, and this is how we're going to like. It sucks to write like that, but that's how you hold yourself accountable, how you hold your team accountable, how you hold
Mm-hmm.
your company accountable. And so that type of writing, I believe, is a really critical piece. And then third, if you do get into management on some level, getting really, really good at writing job descriptions and interviewing people.
Mm-hmm.
If you get lazy there, you're going to have headaches down the road. And I've seen many folks who are like, they get their first manager job, and then maybe they inherit half the team, and then they have to hire 3 or 4 other people, and they're just kind of like hair on fire trying to keep everything together. And so they're just saying yes to whoever looks like they check the box, and then they realize later, like, oh crap, I've created more drama, more anxiety, more issues for myself because I didn't kind of do the work up front. And so
Mm-hmm.
really treating any manager job as a recruiter job, like that's the shift I think you have to make. And I could squeeze it out when I was managing like 12, 15 people, like you could kind of brute force it. But once like I hit 70, 80, 90 people that I was managing on my team, like there's just no way you can't have a quality kind of talent pipeline process and have a healthy team, because you'll have too many duds who show up and they'll just be a really negative energy to the other humans.
um I want to push on this a little bit more, because I want to talk about the opposite side, right? Because we talked a lot about entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
And how there's all this exciting like opportunities and really just what you can get out of entrepreneurship. But to your previous point, there are a lot of people who are maybe at a point in their lives where they cannot take that risk. And I think a lot of our audience may have young kids or, just different factors that they're considering. What are some tactical things that like people may need to think about if they're working 9 to 5? Have you had situations where maybe somebody tried to pursue entrepreneurship but realized it was not right for them and they had to go back, and the appeal of corporate America actually makes the most sense for them? Or even just thinking about like going back to financial independence, there's a lot of good things of bigger companies, right? Like there's really good 401k plans. There's, maybe company match and things that are actually really good for working for a bigger company. What's your perspective there?
Yeah, I'll go through these quickly. Some people start businesses without figuring out if a customer actually wants to buy what they're making.
Mm.
And you shouldn't do that. You should go figure out how to test the demand before you start the company. And I've seen this time and time again where someone's like, I really love baking, so I want to open a bakery. I really love, writing books, so I'm going to start a publishing company. I really love, insert here, making, coffee tables. And what they end up really doing is, oh, I don't make coffee tables, I don't bake, I hire people and I do accounting, and like they do all these operational things because there's no one else to do those things because they're not big enough. And so some people pick the wrong business. Some people realize that the business they've started is not actually going to allow them to do the thing they enjoy doing, right? So they should actually go back somewhere and do that thing and not be someone who does accounting. A third thing is obviously the seasons of life, as you called out. It's a very kind of obvious. Also giving yourself permission to move back and forth. It's not like I quit and then like no one will ever hire me. If you go give it a real shot as an entrepreneur, guaranteed somebody in corporate America will hire you, because now you have this experience that many of the other folks in your team will not have. For many folks, I really think they just they're running away from the job, and so they're not actually running to a healthy business. And that's I think a real reason for many folks to either stick where they're at or be thoughtful, give themselves permission to go back to get a job, and then maybe the next time after they heal up, they can be a bit more thoughtful on what they do.
Yeah, and even to your earlier point, a lot of people who are entrepreneurs are in a way forced to learn a lot very, very quickly. And that is actually value that you can bring back to whether it's a bigger corporate America company or a smaller company, whatever it may be. Like that's actually something you can sell yourself as is I've essentially worn all these hats because I had to, like, I was an entrepreneur and I had to do all these things. So it's actually like something to potentially sell yourself on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, continuing on a little bit further here, talking about risk. So obviously, I mean, we can imagine, right? Small business owners have a really high risk tolerance, and starting your own business that does require and take up a lot of risk. So, LaSean, from your experience, personally or professionally, in your career, when you had to take some calculated risks, whether that was as an entrepreneur or as a leader, can you share a few more? And for our audience who may be a little bit more risk averse, what is your perspective on sort of risk taking, and is there a certain process people can take on to think through that?
Yeah. First off, anyone who hears the word risk and thinks that means playing the lottery or gambling, they have the wrong kind of definition, right? And so you kind of you can reset your definition of risk. And so I would argue that I'm actually a pretty risk adverse person. I just go plan it out before I make the move, right? And there's never a perfect time to say go, but I think that's a really important part. And then very tactically, especially for folks who are employees, but this works on both sides. There's a concept in personal finance called grow the gap, and it just means spend less than you make. And so many times people get the corporate job and they get lazy with their money. And they're just like, and I've heard like the Ramit Sethi things like don't worry about the $4 Starbucks, worry about the $40,000 problem. So while there's a lot of truth to that, I think even more practically, folks just get lazy and they're like, oh, this money's going to show up next month, so I'll solve it then. They don't have the sense of urgency that an entrepreneur is like, I got to solve this right now, or I'm going to run out of runway, or I can't pay my employees, or like whatever it is. And if you can bring that same sense of urgency and that same discipline to how you manage your finances when you have a job, and you grow the gap, you don't get tempted to say, oh, I can buy a nicer car, I can buy a nicer house. You still just in a car and a house, right? And so for many people, they are aspiring to have knowledge worker jobs, but they have a task worker skill set, or they aspire to get extreme performance type money, but they have a knowledge worker job. And so it's also just kind of contextually, we should be aware where we sit and how we should move as a result.
Yeah. 100%. And it's such an interesting, honestly, a new way for, like, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about jobs in a completely different way than I've always thought about it. And honestly, your earlier point about lifestyle inflation, like, this is what I want to avoid, is to grow that gap, right? Like, just because I got a promotion or a bonus doesn't mean I should go out and splurge and buy. Like, I can buy something, but I'm not going to go waste that money. And that's something I'm trying to just continue to remind myself.
It's a hard lesson to learn. I had, my first car was a Nissan Sentra, then I got a Nissan Altima, then I got an Infiniti. Then what did I get after that? I got a Porsche Cayenne. I was like, oh, I got a Porsche Cayenne. And then, I kept getting cars. And eventually my last car was, I got a Model S, a Tesla. And it was like, all right, no one really needs to buy $100,000 car. It's like a silly purchase, right? And when the pandemic hit, it was really interesting. And what I realized is, like, I don't like cars. Like, it was kind of interesting. I was like, I just keep buying these nicer cars because I need a box to move me around when I like drive to this office or go to this place. And so where I've landed now is I'm hyper focused on pedestrian first lifestyle. And so, like, I'm always trying to walk as many places as I can instead of getting in a vehicle. And it's so interesting. Like, I was just on this hamster wheel, like, get the nicer car. And it never dawned on me to say, like, LaSean, you don't need a car.
Right. I mean, listen, I'm a train, bus, and a Ford Escape girl, so nothing fancy here.
There you go.
Well, I would love to hear just what are some of the best advice that you've gotten and some of the worst?
Yeah, I'll start with the worst, and we've hit it as a theme here. I like to summarize it as most adults don't know what they're talking about. And what I mean by that is we often take our experience and we generalize it as if it's a rule that can apply to everyone. And we give really bad advice that way because we don't have all the context on someone else. The second piece of really bad advice is we let our fears kind of seep into the advice we give, and we can potentially limit someone's potential. And so I think those are two forms of really bad advice, or how those show up, are many forms. Because, one example I'll give you is the good advice part. I was working at this place, and the CFO was talking to me, and he kind of like taking me under my wings, and like he was just always just like giving me little tips. And I was passing by his office, and he called me in, and he was like, it was so odd. He was like, "You're still here?" And I was like, "Oh, it's just lunchtime." He's like, "No, why do you still work here?" Right? Like he wasn't my manager or anything, but this is a public company, right? And so this is a pretty big deal. And so he was basically like, "LaSean, we've had all these passing conversations about what you want to do and what's possible." And he's like, why haven't you quit this job? You should not be here. And it was just really powerful for somebody to give me permission or remind myself that I had permission. I was like waiting for the perfect moment, and it kind of never comes. And then the second piece, second kind of best advice I've gotten is really try to figure out who you are and what you're trying to get out of it, and not play the game for anybody else. So there's no award or degree or fancy banquet where everyone claps for you. Like I've been at these things where like it feels good for a moment, and then the next day you're just back to feeling regular. And so if you can find what's actually motivating you and exciting you and energizing you, it's going to allow you to just be better than anybody else playing that particular game. And as a result, you're going to be more satisfied. But from a financial standpoint, you're going to be the best at it. And so if you're a smart negotiator, you're going to make the most money. And so I don't care if somebody says, "I like making cupcakes. I like, doing crazy industrial design to invent the future of like nuclear power." Like, I don't care what you do. Whatever you pick, if you pick the thing that energizes you, you will become the best, and the best usually gets compensated. And so for me, I try to keep that in mind and not let someone else's opportunity become my preference.
I love how a lot of this has to do with really going inward, right? And really figuring out your why and your drivers and your motivations versus what maybe society wants you to do. And there's so much noise out there, and we can get caught up in that, but really staying true to ourselves and our truth, I think that's amazing. But for someone that may want to make the jump into starting their own business or has a passion, any tips on like hot markets or any hot industries right now that might be more prone to be successful in?
I would say avoid the hype train unless it happens to be what you're already good at, right? So, AI showed up over the last couple of years. I just happened to be working in computer vision and machine learning for years, right? And as somebody who's worked in it for years, there are all sorts of opportunities. And when I see like a TikToker or a YouTuber, like, "Here's how you make money in AI," like, I know that's a flash in the pan. And there are going to be some of those folks who go make $500,000, with some little short, time arbitrage, but that is not a long-term play. And so I would not chase the hype cycle. What I would do instead is go figure out who is a customer. And by customer, I mean an industry, an audience, a role, a type, someone you can really describe. The more precise, the better. Who is someone that you kind of deeply, that you care about as a customer, and go spend time with them, establish trust. Maybe that's, creating content for someone. Maybe that's coaching people. Maybe like finding ways to go genuinely build trust with some audience you care about, and then figure out what their key pain points are. Figure out which of those pain points they're willing to continuously, not one time, on a recurring basis, pay to solve. Because people can have an acute problem, and then they could have, they're like, "But I'll solve it myself." And so a customer you care about, a pain point that recurs that they're willing to pay to have someone else solve. And then you go figure out what your product or service is. And the beauty of that flow is until you build your product, you can still have your job. And so many people start building the product and they're like, where are my customers? And you'll find that most businesses are not great ideas because no one wants to pay for your sandwich. Your sandwich isn't good. And so that's the flaw. And so if you start with the customer and then work your way to solving their problem, you'll have a much higher hit rate. And this is for me why today in my day job, I'm a full-time investor. I invest in other entrepreneurs because I'm looking for folks who have already started to validate that customer development process. Because an idea on a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint is just not the same as like, hey, I've convinced 12 people to pay for this. I'm like, all right, I'm going to help you go, with some cash and go turn that into 1,000. That's infinitely more viable and less risky than I have an idea and I have 0 customers that have wired any money into the bank to solve their problem. So that's how I would look at it. And through that lens, a lot of folks can go validate their idea before they make the leap. And I think that's just very comforting that there's a path where you don't have to risk it all to see if you even have a shot.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. We love tactical recommendations, and that's exactly what I think our audience is going to need to potentially take that step of identifying the problem, finding a solution, testing it out before bringing it to, maybe an investor like you. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and spending time with us today. Before we go, let our audience know any projects you're working on or where people can find you.
Yeah, the easiest place to find me is either on LinkedIn, it's LaSean, last name Smith, or on Twitter, and I'm just LaSean at Twitter. And what I would want people to reach out if this conversation is interesting and you want to have a free 15, 30-minute follow-on, chat on like, hey, LaSean, you sparked something. And like, I want a sounding board. I'm down. Like I said, I have agency over my calendar. And what I find is most people don't follow through. But if out of this conversation, 16 people reach out and I have, 8 hours of calls, guaranteed one of those 16 people are going to be interesting and they're going to give me some new perspective. And so instead of saying like, I should charge $300 for a 30-minute call, like, no, come talk to me for free. You bring your energy, your honesty, your vulnerability. I will share my advice and I'm sure we'll find a way to trade value in return. So those are the forms of communication, and excited to chat with anybody who's energized by this topic.
Amazing. Thank you so much for offering your time. And again, thank you for being here with us today. We, of course, want to hear from our audience as well. So for any entrepreneur listeners that we have, we want to hear your experience so far, or anybody who is working in corporate life who might be flirting with the idea of becoming an entrepreneur. Of course, we want to hear from you as well. You can reach us at whereisthelinepod@gmail.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to us. We are on Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Thank you again for listening, and we will talk to you later. Bye.